Which Pokemon drinks hydrogen peroxide? Ho-Oh. What is going on, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive, diving deeper into the Jungle Cup, and this time we're looking at a Pokemon that, holy cow, after this update dropped, this Pokemon was literally like on everybody's list of like, please do a deep dive, please do a deep dive, please do a deep dive. Here we are talking about Delcatty. Yeah, Delcatty. Normal type Pokemon maxing out at 1496, which actually means that when we have 15s across the board at level 40, we have our best possible CP for the Great League. Holy cow. Unfortunately, this does mean that there is a requirement to have the best possible Delcatty, that it needs to be 100% and it needs to be maxed out. So there's a steep investment for you. But according to my spreadsheets and all the numbers that I have ran, Delcatty actually ranks 36th in bulk and 109 in stat product, which the bulk is pretty respectable. The stat product kind of shoots it down for me. But of course, all of this does come from our base stats here with a 132 on attack, 127 on defense, and a 179 in stamina. Not too shabby there. I'd really like if these two places just kind of switched around and did some musical chairs there, but hey, we'll work with what we got. So the reason that everyone wants to be talking about Delcatty today is because we did get an addition into our moveset in that we do have Charm now. So let's quickly go over all of these moves here. We actually don't have a single normal type move, which means we actually have no stab benefits using Delcatty here. So Feint Attack here for 3 energy per turn, we do get 3 damage per turn. Zen Headbutt is 2 energy per turn for 2.66 damage per turn. Then we do have Charm here for 2 energy per turn, we do get that whopping 5.33 damage per turn. Then we do move on to our charge moves here. Disarming Voice is 45 energy for 70 damage at a 1.56. We do have Play Rough here for 60 energy. We get 90 damage at a 1.50. And we do have this wonderful Wild Charge here for 50 energy. We get 90 damage at a 1.80. So out of all these moves, I mean, it'd be upsetting for you guys if I did anything but Charm. So we're gonna go with Charm. But in the actual charge move area, there's some kind of interesting things that you could do here. So Disarming Voice, while it is a little bit more efficient than actually having Play Rough here, Play Rough does hit just a little bit harder. If you're okay with having Wild Charge being your fastest move, I could actually see Play Rough being okay to use if you want like a little bit more oomph out of your Delcatty. But since Disarming Voice is actually our fastest move that we possibly have here, I did go with that for the simulations in this video, as well as with Wild Charge, just to kind of give us a ton of speed and hopefully be able to output tons of damage right off the bat. So with that moveset in mind, let's actually move on to our shields here. Up against the entire cup, we do start with our 0 versus 0, which is actually going to be a 44.8%. Not too bad. Of course, I do like to see that 50% there, but next we'll move on to our 2 versus 0, which is actually a 96.3, and in that shield scenario, I'm actually looking for the Pokemon that still end up beating us, even though we have complete shield advantage. And out of the ones that beat us, the biggest common theme that I could find was Razor Leaf. Razor Leaf does a ton of damage up against any Pokemon, and especially since it's going to be neutral damage in our case here, it still is going to be very punishing and very hard to overcome any Razor Leaf user using Delcatty. Now next scenario, we do have a 0 versus 2, which in that one we actually end up winning 14.2%. Which is actually pretty freaking sweet. And all of that, of course, is thanks to Charm here, putting us over that 10% mark into the double digits like I always want to see. And some of the Pokemon that we actually end up still beating, even though we have complete shield disadvantage this time, surprisingly, a lot of the flyers show up here. So even though we have Wild Charge to boot, just in case, even though they have 2 full shields, we're still able to just output a ton of damage and still get off some decent amount of wins up against the flyers, which is kind of interesting. Then last but not least, in our shield scenarios, we do move into the 2 versus 2, which is a whopping 76.9. Holy cow, that's huge. So, of course, most of that does actually come from our charm fast move there as well. Basically, if we're able to just kind of remove shields from certain Pokemon, if they're less bulky, more glassy, kind of easier to punish with just straight up damage out of the gate, if we never give them that option to even use a shield, then holy cow, are they gonna fall pretty freaking fast there, which does inflate that number way higher than it would have been before adding charm into the game. So to actually visualize some of these matchups here, we're actually going to go into PvPoke. We're going to give ourselves our Delcatty with Charm, Wild Charge, and Disarming Voice, just like we talked about earlier. Then we're actually going to do one shield for us, one shield for the opponent, up against the entire Jungle Cup. Once we hit battle, you can see in that 1v1, we do still have a 58.2%, which is right in line from where we were in our shields. A 44.8 in the 0 versus 0, up to the 58.2, and then finally up to the 76.9 in that 2v2. So working out great there. If we break this out into types here, starting with the bug type, you can kind of see that we end up only having 8 losses once we get down here to the bottom. And some of these losses are, unfortunately, they do start to make a little sense once you kind of dig a little bit deeper here. So things like Dustox, Ariados, Scizor, Beedrill, Fortress, and Venomoth are all going to have a pretty easy time up against our Delcatty here. Now, Ladian is just going to have an insane amount of bulk, along with Vespiquen also having a ton of bulk to boot as well. Most of those guys are going to be poison type, except for Scizor and Fortress, of course. They're going to be steel type, but either way, all of the Pokemon that we talked about are basically going to have a huge resistance to a lot of the damage that we are trying to output here. Next, moving on to the electric types here, we actually have a pretty fair matchup up against a lot of these too. Once we get down into the losses here, you can see we only have 6 losses up against the electrics. Minun, Zapdos, Pachirisu, Lantern, and Magneton and Magnezone. The big ones there are probably Lantern, Magneton, and Magnezone. Pachirisu, Zapdos, and Minun aren't too big of a deal. I don't see a lot of people, really trying to use any of those, but for what it's worth, they can actually beat our Delcatty here, but Lantern, Magneton, and Magnezone definitely going to be the ones to pay attention to there. Lantern, just an insane amount of bulk. Magneton and Magnezone also carrying that steel typing, which is going to resist a ton of our damage, so kind of just makes some sense that we're going to lose up against those bottom two, and then Lantern for the bulk, of course. Next, we move into the grass typing, which this one's kind of the one that we start to look a little worse in. We only have 13 wins here. The rest are actually going to be losses, which does mean that we have more losses than we do wins here. If we look at some of these wins here, we do see Alolan Executor, which does make some sense. Cacturne and Nuzleaf, both of those make pretty good sense. Breloom, making some sense. Most of these in the wins make a lot of sense here. With Charm, we're outputting tons of damage, and if they have any kind of vulnerability to that damage, they're going to get pretty much wrecked. So if we go into some of the losses though, we can kind of start to see down here towards the bottom a ton of the Razor Leaf users for one, and if they have a poison typing as well, it just makes it even harder to overcome. So things like Venusaur, Gloom, Vileplume, Ivysaur, Victory Belt, Roselia, Weeping Belt, and Roserade, all going to be some of the hardest possible matchups to go up against, which, like I said, that resisted damage is really going to put a damper onto our insane amount of damage output from Charm as it is. Last typing, but definitely not the least typing, we do have the normal, which we actually only end up having 13 losses this time, which actually ends up meaning that we have more wins than we do losses. So let's kind of quickly browse through some of these wins here. We'll get down into some of these losses, and as you can see, the Vigoroth definitely showing up down here at the bottom. Wigglytuff, Munchlax, Miltank, Snorlax, Babero, Castform, and Redacted and Furret all showing up down there at the very bottom. So out of those 9, I mean, they're obviously Vigoroth, Wigglytuff. Munchlax is pretty relevant, not super relevant, but definitely one of the more hot topics than some of the others. I mean, the normal types in general are pretty okay. Some notable wins that we do have are up against some of the flyers here. You can see we do have Staravia, Staraptor up there at the very, very top, being some of the easiest ones to go up against. You can see Pidgeotto there. I mean, some of the more obscure ones, we do win up against the Noctowl. It's a pretty close battle, but it still is a win. And then, Pidgeot we do lose up against. So some of the flyers we do okay, but not all of them, and it's just kind of up against the normal types. Now shifting on into the meta here, we actually start with some more shields, looking at our 0 versus 0 up against the 22 meta-relevant Pokemon as defined by PvPoke. We actually start with a 36.4% win ratio there, which is decent. I mean, it's a little worse than up against the entire cup, but these are some of the more formidable Pokemon, so that does make a little bit of sense. Next, we move into the 1 versus 0, which is a 77.3%, so looking pretty strong there. Not quite as good as our 2 versus 0 in the previous segment, but still doing pretty strong. Next, we move into our 0 versus 1, which drops down to a whopping 4.5. So that was kind of going to be my saving grace here. I really thought that possibly if that 0 versus 1 is like a really strong number, possibly we could have some really high numbers with our Delcatty here, but unfortunately 4.5 isn't hitting on a whole lot. Moving on to our last shield scenario, in the 1 versus 1 we do end with a 36.4 as well, so we're actually tied. Up against the meta Pokemon, it doesn't really make a huge difference whether we open or close with Delcatty, but it does make a bigger difference how we effectively use our shields. And I think that's going to go for a lot of the Pokemon that end up carrying Charm, because we're so reliant on our fast move. We basically have to play it pretty safe whenever it comes to using our shields. We kind of got to know how much damage we can take versus how much we can not take, and using our shields to the best advantage that we possibly can. So back over in PvPoke, you can see we do have our Delcatty still set up with Charm, Wall Charge, Disarming Voice. We do have one shield for ourselves. We are going to do a custom battle this time with one shield for them. We're going to quick fill it with the Jungle Cup meta there. Once we hit battle, you can see we do have that 36.4 just like we talked about. Going down into the Pokemon here in the meta, we can actually see that Masquerain, Breloom, Heracross, Golem, Graveler, then we do have Raichu, Scyther, and Noctowl all as our wins, with that Credilli actually being a tie for us here. So out of those wins, those are some decent ones. I mean, Breloom and Heracross are pretty freaking nice that we end up beating those. Masquerain is, I mean, that's okay. That's a pretty solid win for us. Golem and Graveler, though, I really do like to see the fact that we beat those, whereas in some of the other Charm users don't do nearly as good up against those. And then the Raichu and the Scyther, I mean, you can kind of see that basically, like, Breloom and Heracross are going to take, what, super effective damage because of their fighting typing. And then outside of that, we're basically just kind of hitting them for a ton of neutral damage. And I mean, we're doing really good at it up until we get to Credilli, which is our only tie. And then we do have the Magneton, Vespiquen, Magnezone, Pidgeot, Lantern, Scizor, Vigoroth, Victreebel, Beedrill, Forretress, Venomoth, Ivysaur, and Venusaur rounding out the losses there. So down there towards the bottom, you can see Venusaur, Ivysaur, Venomoth, Beedrill, Forretress, Victreebel. Most of these bottom Pokemon just have some sort of resistance to us. Vigoroth is a slight exception. Lantern is a slight exception. And then, you know, Pidgeot also going to be acceptance there. Magnezone and Magneton also going to be resistant damage, while Vespiquen just has a ton of bulk. So you can kind of see that our losses are pretty okay. Like, I mean, even though we do have a lot more losses than we do wins in the meta, we still have a pretty defined role here. And between Wigglytuff and Delcatty, which could possibly warrant a versus video for this weekend, let me know down in the comments if you really do want to see that. Not 100% sure how I feel about Delcatty. I definitely think that Wigglytuff was a little bit more intriguing, but this will probably be a little bit different depending on how the if we actually do a versus video. But so, like, if we look at Wigglytuff, we had Ice Beam. Basically, it's a choice between, do we want Ice Beam or do we want Wild Charge when it comes to moves. And then, I mean, Wigglytuff's stats are pretty freaking stacked. I mean, it's got huge amounts of bulk. It definitely does have more bulk, and it definitely does have more stat product as well. So it is going to be a little bit better on the actual stat side of things. But I mean, it'd be kind of hard to say that Delcatty is the budget option for Wigglytuff. It's a worse version of Wigglytuff. Let's put it that way. It's not much worse. Like, it's a very close contender, but it's worse in a lot of areas that are really hard to overcome. It's going to cost more. It's going to be insanely hard to get at a 15-15-15. And then on top of that, it's going to perform slightly worse, and it's going to have just slightly worse numbers all around. So, I mean, Delcatty, if you've got one by chance and you're not afraid to just drop that Stardust on your game, then Delcatty could be okay for you. I mean, you do have to play around some of its interesting weakness and some of its matchups. You do have to pay attention to your shields, but it's doable. I definitely say it's doable. So that is actually going to be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks so much for watching. Of course, we will go ahead and play that sweet, sweet ending footage for you. Well, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, if you do have any ideas for content, please drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to look at those for you guys. Of course, if you want to join my personal Discord, get to talking to some people that have a similar outlook as myself, definitely go down into the description, join that Discord there. If you want to become a Patreon, there is a link down in the description for that as well. My outlook on Patreon is I don't want to put anything behind a paywall. This is what I do. You guys get every bit of what I make, and I don't want to limit that to someone else just because they can't pay for something. I didn't think that was fair. If you want to be a Patreon, just know that you're literally doing it from the kindness of your heart, wanting to support me, and I appreciate that. You don't even understand how much. There are a couple of other options if you would like to join the community here on YouTube. It's very similar to a Twitch-like subscription where it's a dollar amount per month depending on where you live. And then that monthly fee basically gets funneled to me every month. And you do get a couple of special perks here on YouTube, like some badges and some emojis or whatever. I honestly think those are only for live streaming. So that may not be the way that most people want to go, but that's an option if you want to. Other than that, if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, that link is actually going to be down in the description as well. And until our next video, guys, that should be it. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out. And until our next video, I will catch you then.